Welcome to Bullet Points. In this episode, we're going to be talking about recent bills passed in California, New York's ammunition background check system, and a roundup of federal gun policy issues. I'm here with NSSF's Larry Keane. Larry, we're here today to talk about a few of these issues going around the states. First of all, tell us, what do you do at NSSF?
Well, I'm the Senior Vice President for Government and Public Affairs and the General Counsel to NSSF, among other roles in the industry. I wear hats in SAMI and some other things. But so basically anything dealing with government affairs, regulatory affairs, with engaging with ATF and the alphabet soup in Washington, public affairs, dealing with the media, and then just the general day-to-day kind of legal issues that confront any business.
And one of these issues is California. We got some stuff happening in California. Some gun bills were recently passed there. Can you tell me about those issues, how they are affecting industry and gun owners?
Well, yes. California passes gun control measures every year, year in, year out. Doesn't ever seem to do anything to address the problem with crime in major cities in California, of course. Not surprisingly, we all understand that criminals don't follow the law. So they've passed a bunch of new laws that will impact the industry, a bunch of laws that are directed at dealers that will increase the cost to operate their business, will do nothing to make Californians safer. One of the bills that's been introduced or signed into law is an excise tax of 11% on firearms, ammunition, and precursor parts, whatever that's supposed to mean. It's not really clear, but it's really sort of aimed at frames or receivers, et cetera. So we're taking a look at that one in particular, the excise tax, because it's really a sin tax. It's designed to suppress the exercise of the Second Amendment, which would be unconstitutional. So we're taking a look at that as to whether there's a legal basis to challenge it. They also passed a statute on microstamping. So a number of years ago, California said that all new models of handguns have to come with microstamping, which doesn't work. It's unreliable, et cetera. That our members are aware of that.
New York pretty much proved that it's just an expense to the taxpayer.
Well, New York passed it, and New Jersey has passed it. Now, California had a statute a number of years ago as part of the Unsafe Handgun Act. So to have a handgun go on the roster, to be able to sell it in California on the commercial market, it had to have a chamber load indicator, a magazine disconnect, and microstamping. Well, it's possible to do chamber-loaded indicators. It's possible to do magazine disconnect. You have to have both for new models. Then they layered on microstamping in May of 2013. And so since May of 2013 until very recently, no new models of handguns have come on the roster in California. And that's because it's not possible to microstamp. Plus, California's definition of what constitutes a new model is absurd. Like if you have a part in a handgun, for example, that the dimensions change, let's say to be more robust, to last longer, more reliable, that's a new model. Now you have to have all those things, including microstamping. Or you change how the part is manufactured. Now it's a new model. Now you have to have all these things, including microstamping. So no new models came on the roster. And models that were on the roster fell off. There was a significant decrease in that. So what they did was they removed the provision in the Unsafe Handgun Act that requires microstamping, which had been enjoined by a federal court challenging the Unsafe Handgun Act based on the Second Amendment post the Bruin decision. And so they repealed that from the law but enacted a different statute to now mandate a study of the feasibility or reliability of microstamping. Originally, it was to require microstamping separately from the Unsafe Handgun Act. but it would have applied to used guns as well, not just newly introduced models, which would have made the problem even worse. Doesn't solve the problem that it doesn't actually work, as we know from the independent peer-reviewed studies. So now they're going to do a study by the California Department of Justice, which has looked at this in the past and concluded it doesn't work. New York is doing the same thing. They're looking at it. We've provided all of the peer-reviewed studies that show it doesn't work. New Jersey's looking at it, same thing. So we're seeing this trend now where states are starting to study microstamping. I have some concerns about that, of what's potentially going on in the background with the gun control groups, or where they're going to manufacture, if you will, pardon the pun, their own study.
Yeah.
Say, oh, look, it just works, it's wonderful, it's perfect, which of course it's not, and we know it's not. So, California never stops. And the other problem in California is they kind of lead, and then things flow. Yeah. That takes root in California, and then you start seeing it in New York, New Jersey, et cetera. So,
anything to really combat those things at this point? Is it all just through the courts, litigation?
Well, I mean, again, we're looking at the excise tax issue. Microstamping, I think, could be, if they were to come out and say mandate it, I think there would be a basis to challenge it, both on the fact that it doesn't actually work, and second, there's it would suppress the Second Amendment. But that remains to be seen. I don't know. It could be that they're just sort of doing the study to placate the demands of the gun control groups. But if they're honest, they know it doesn't work. The excise tax, we're worried about that.
And the excise tax too is where does that money go?
Well, that's part of the problem. The money doesn't just go to the general treasury. It's not like a sales tax that then the money just goes to the general treasury to be spent generally. It is, targeted for, what they call gun violence prevention. And so there's it's kind of complicated how they're going to dole out the money, but it's all about, like as if law-abiding citizens exercising a Second Amendment right is what causes gun violence, so we're going to tax that activity to stop gun violence. It's a little bit like, it's probably a lot like taxing a pharmacist for selling prescription drugs to consumers to stop the flow of fentanyl coming over the border, or to stop the illegal drug sales in the streets of Los Angeles or San Francisco. One has nothing to do with the other. So again, we're taking a look at that to see whether there's a basis to file a challenge.
Yeah. In New York recently started their ammunition background check process. How's that going, and what do we see as some problems with it?
Not well,
okay.
From what we hear. So New York passed background checks for ammunition in the wake of the Sandy Hook tragedy. But they wanted to piggyback on the FBI NICS, and we told the legislature, you can't do that. NICS can only be used for background checks for guns. So they had no way of doing it, and they basically just, kind of sat there on the books unenforced, no way for anybody to comply with it, until they decided to spend the money to build this infrastructure to do background checks through the state police. Then they also transitioned from being, having what's called, to a POC state, where the dealer interacts with the state police and doesn't go directly to NICS as a NICS state. So you're getting these quirky results where someone will pass a background check for a firearm and then not pass the background check for ammunition, which is absurd. So it's not going well. We've heard delays. We've heard concerns about access to personal information from the consumer that has to provide the information to make the ammunition purchase, and these anomalies where, for example, there's an instance where a colonel of the New York State Police passed a background check for a gun but failed a background check for ammunition. This is the colonel in the state police. So it's really not going very smoothly. They're charging fees that are pretty darn expensive, like about $10, just a little less for a firearms background check, and I think it's $250 or something like that for every ammunition purchase. So
Yeah.
it will do nothing to reduce crime. I mean, criminals will just,
Right.
go to other states to buy ammunition, or you create a black market for ammunition. It's not really going to do anything to reduce, the chaos that is occurring in like New York City, for example.
Do we see that any similar bills like that hitting any other states, or is that really just limited to New York right now?
No, we will, there are some other states that require ammunition background checks, and we will see that spread. That is one of the agenda items for the gun control groups. And there have been bills introduced in Congress to do it, but they're not, it's just not likely to occur in Congress, and it's it's just very, very expensive. And you think about how many times, a target shooter purchases ammunition.
Right.
It's just not an effective. And the sheriffs in New York and the police in New York know that this is not going to do anything to reduce crime.
Has there been anything with enforceability of that, or is it all gone through the purchase? How do you really ultimately enforce the ammunition that's already out there?
Well, people, that already had ammunition, they still get to keep it. But if they go to buy more ammunition, they got to go through the background check system.
Right.
And
And what about crossing over state lines and whatnot?
Well, there's nothing. There's nothing you can buy ammunition in other states, right? It's not like the restrictions under the Gun Control Act on purchasing firearms. Like, you can't buy a handgun across state lines directly, right? You have to have it shipped back into your state to an FFL in your state.
There's no serial numbers on ammunition.
There's no serial numbers on ammunition, although they did try that a number of years ago. That's impossible.
Yeah.
It would basically shut down the ammunition manufacturing industry to try to put serial numbers. But, the other side, they just have these pie-in-the-sky, panacea du jour. It was ballistics imaging. That failed in New York and Maryland. And then it was microstamping, which doesn't work. And frankly, in talking to the manufacturers and to forensic examiners, it will never work.
It's easily defeatable, too.
Leave that aside. It just doesn't work as advertised. It doesn't produce a clear, legible, readable mark, and it's easily defeated, and firing pins wear out and are replaced.
One thing after the next, right?
So it's not going to do anything. Criminals will simply scratch off the marking, or if they stole the gun, they don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to them. So it's not going to be an effective tool. But it became, it's the panacea du jour. Bullet serialization for a while was the panacea for gun crime. None of these things work yet. You look in New York, they have no bail. You have prosecutors who won't prosecute.
Right.
You have defund the police. You have crushed police morale.
Right.
And crime is rampant. It's just out of control. People are right to be concerned about crime. That's why gun sales continue to be very strong. People are, of course, very concerned for their personal safety. That's been for quite a while now. The primary reason people are buying firearms, certainly since the pandemic, where we saw the incredible increase that carried right on through the civil unrest in the summer of 21, or leading into
at that point we had 8 or 9 million. New and to date maybe 10 to 12, something like that.
And all just very diverse demographics: men,
it's everybody.
Women, Asian Americans, African Americans, LGBTQ members, Hispanics, big Asian Americans, enormous increases. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, it didn't matter. So we're seeing, the market is cooling, but you'd expect that after a big surge like that.
Yeah.
But every time we get a spike, when we see it sort of come off of the peak, the valley floor is always higher because there's all these new gun owners.
It's crime and unrest that's really driving that, and some of it also has to do with gun laws going into effect.
Yes.
What are we seeing like in other states or federal or on executive level?
Well, in terms of federal legislation, Congress is so divided, it's very difficult to see any kind of gun control or gun legislation, pro or con, moving in the legislature, particularly the Senate requires 60 votes to move legislation, and so it's very challenging for gun control advocates to get to 60, and for things we would like to see happen, it's the same, just a different direction. As far as executive orders, we're very concerned about that, and activity by ATF, the zero tolerance, disengage in the business proposed rule, we think is just not correct interpretation of the law. We think it's very clearly not correct.
And what's the summary of that?
Well, so the Bipartisan Safer Community Act made a very minor tweak to the definition of engaged in the business with respect to a dealer, and removed the requirement in the statute that it had to be for livelihood. And basically, it's just if you're doing it for profit, but it also still has to be repetitive, ongoing purchasing and selling firearms for the purpose of making a profit. And so ATF's put out this rule that basically a single sale of a gun or offering to sell a gun, they say makes you a dealer. And that's simply absolutely not the law. Why are they doing it? Because it's a giant step towards universal background checks.
Right.
And that means National Gun Registry, because the Obama DOJ has acknowledged, internally at least, that it only works if there's national registration.
Right.
And that's the end game, is national registration.
Right.
Because you can't confiscate guns until you know who has them.
Who has them.
So,
And what are some of the big federal level things that we're dealing with? I know we're getting into some states with FIND Act or some other things. Just a brief.
So the discrimination against the industry is a big issue. So that's why we are pursuing the Fair Access to Banking Act, where we have about a little more than a third of the Senate co-sponsoring the bill. We have it in the House, and we're upwards of 185 members, I think, co-sponsoring that bill in the House, and that would go a long way to stopping the discrimination by the big banks that won't lend to members of the industry, something we see. We're also pursuing the FIND Act federally as well as the state level, and it's the same thing. If you discriminate against members of the firearms industry, that's your choice, but then you're not eligible to receive taxpayer-funded government contracts. And so we've been successful in getting that enacted in a number of states. We're continuing to work on that, like Oklahoma, for example, Kansas, and some other states. So we're very proud of the success we've had in getting the FIND Act passed and the progress we're making in bringing this to the attention of legislators. But again, it's very difficult to move any kind of federal legislation. We're having more success at the state level. And then there's the merchant category code issue, which, again, it's both a state and federal issue. This is the merchant category code adopted by ISO, the standard setter organization, at the request of gun control advocates and Amalgamated Bank, which is a union-controlled bank. It's known as the Bank of the DNC. They pride themselves on being progressive, and they advocated for it. Now, the code just simply would identify who, the nature of the retailer or the business. It does not tell anybody, when you go in to buy something and use your credit card, it doesn't tell anybody what's inside the basket. The credit card companies don't care. It's none of their business. I mean, they're just processing the transaction, the payment. So it doesn't do what the left thinks it does, but it's really, they want that. That's the first step.
And the banks stepped away from it.
Well, the credit card processors, after
right.
failing to stop it or protest it sufficiently, in my opinion, at the ISO process, which was reeks. That process reeks. We're trying to get Congress to, investigate how this happened, because it had been rejected several times, and all of a sudden it passes. Well, it didn't pass, actually. The recommendation was no, and then it got elevated within the ISO process, which is very convoluted, and I won't try to explain it to you, because I don't think I even understand it. But within the same day, it was the rejection was overruled, and it was implemented. So, and then as soon as it got implemented, like, there was a lot of political pressure, and the credit card processor says, because they know it, because in the past they had been opposed to it. They know it doesn't do what the other side thinks it does. It doesn't tell you what's in the basket, but it's the first step. Once they get that, then they're going to say, well, now we need to know what's in the basket.
Right.
Right. So
we keep pushing these things incrementally.
So that, that's good, because then that's too much ammunition. That's too many guns. That's the wrong kind of gun. Right? And then they want to use that to shut down sales, right, and to infringe upon your right. And it would also, their theory is it would allow the banks to file what are called suspicious activity reports, which they're already required to do. But how are they? What would they report? Somebody used a credit card to buy firearms,
right?
And so then all of a sudden you have
background check, and
you'll have ATF or Homeland Security or FBI showing up at your door to say, "Let me see what you bought,"
right?
From the gun store last weekend. That's
insane.
That's chilling, right? But that's what this leads to,
right?
And then you have a private, registry of gun owners. They Eric bought guns. Oh, we'll put him on the list.
Right. And then one final thing. I don't know if there's anything we have on this. ATF, we partner with them in a lot of different things.
Yes.
There's been a lot of pressure on the industry with the Biden administration. Anything in particular going on in that realm right now that we should be concerned with?
Well, we continue to try to have good dialogue with ATF. We are concerned about the zero tolerance. We are concerned about their changing positions, longstanding positions like arm braces, for example, where they kind of flip-flop when it becomes politically expedient. So we're concerned about that. We're concerned about engaging the business for a couple of reasons. One, it's just the wrong interpretation of the statute. Mm-hmm. But we're also concerned, like how if you had 400,000 new people getting licensed, what ATF would spend all its time licensing these people, inspecting these people who aren't really dealers, they're just consumers. They're not covered by the statute, right. And then they'll spend all their time doing that and not provide the industry, the actual industry members, customer service, right?
Degrading the intent of the
degrading services that members of the industry need in order to operate their business. You need an import license. You need to renew your license. You need NFA forms, and so we're concerned about that. And the great irony about this engaging the business and sweeping all of these literally hundreds of thousands of Americans as licensees is, back in the Clinton administration, the gun control groups complained that there were too many people with licenses, and we have to shut this down, and we can't have all these people with licenses. Right. And at that time, I think it was something in the order of 280,000 people had licenses. Many of them had licenses so they could buy at wholesale, right? Or what the other side derisively referred to as kitchen table dealers. They weren't storefront FFLs. And so ATF ratcheted up the requirements, and the number of dealers dropped to something in the order of 50 to 60,000, where it's kind of been plus or minus for a while. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, they've completely reversed themselves. Yeah. Now everyone has to have a license, So it's like, well, make up your minds,
right.
But what they're trying to do is not what Congress said in the act. You still have to be repetitive, ongoing, time, attention, labor, and repetitive purchase and sales of firearms. Right. One, putting a gun on you in the penny saver. I don't know if people even know what a penny saver is anymore. Marketplace or advertising that you've got some guns you want to sell because you don't use them anymore, or you want whatever you want to sell some guns to get some money so you can buy an engagement ring or buy Christmas presents or whatever your reason is. That does not make you a dealer.
Right.
And so but that's what they're trying to reach towards.
Yeah.
So that's concerning. But going back quickly on the MCC issue, yeah. We have had success at the state level in passing laws to mandate that you cannot use the code. And we've got a bunch of those passed. We're working on more. California enacted a law that mandates the use of the code, which creates a real problem for the credit card processors because now they have to have like two systems
right.
to process And I know what's going to happen in California. Consumers are going to say, I'm not going to use a credit card. Or dealers are going to say, we're not taking credit cards anymore. It's cash or a personal check. We're not, and so even if they've passed this law that doesn't
just haven't thought beyond that at this point. I mean, and I don't think they really.
Well, you'll see dealers will put ATM machines in their store. I know a dealer, at least one dealer in Massachusetts, has got an ATM right there. Like, just if you don't have the cash
is king.
Cash is king. That's right. So we're working on trying to get federal legislation introduced to take care of, address that issue. But again, it's just very difficult to move federal legislation.
Right.
It's both a blessing and a curse. We are doing a lot of work on the conservation front. Like it was NSSF that kind of pulled the fire alarm in Congress on the Biden administration's interpretation of the language in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that they claimed now barred the use of any Department of Education funds for hunter education or archery in the school, which is just ridiculous. That's not what was intended. It's not really a fair reading of the language. So we're the ones who pulled the fire alarm on that. Which,
and Congress just
424 to 1 in the House and unanimous in the Senate. So only one knucklehead, a Democrat woman,
just couldn't move.
Texas, voted no, and which is like, by the way, who's endorsed by the gun control groups.
There you go.
But,
that's why.
So we got that passed, which is good. Fix that, because under that logic, you wouldn't be able to have shop class, woodworking class. You wouldn't have home ec. You wouldn't even have chemistry class.
Yeah.
Because chemicals can be dangerous.
Right.
Now that may have been a good thing for some people. I don't know. But and we're working on some other conservation legislation. To protect the use of traditional ammunition on federal lands. So there's a bill that would prohibit the Department of Interior from banning lead ammunition for hunting and shooting on federal lands, unless they had actual field data science that showed that there was a problem. Right. There is no evidence of a problem.
Yeah.
On
and that's been shown over years now.
Yes, I mean there's no human health risk. That's just a canard, and there's no evidence of species specific declines attributable to the use of traditional ammunition. And our position has been very clear on this. Unless there's sound science of a population impact, which is what you're supposed to do when you're managing wildlife, you manage populations. There's no reason to ban, and if there is evidence, then you look at what the possible remedial actions that can be taken, and then you pick the one that's least costly to the hunter in the most narrow geographic region necessary to address the issue, and for as short a time period as is necessary to address the problem. So that's a big issue for us as well.
Yeah. So a lot going on. We're always pushing back. They're pushing back at us.
Yeah. A lot of litigation, as you know, as well.
So I appreciate you giving us the roundup on all these different issues, and hope to have you in again to get an update on some of this stuff. And of course,
anytime, you know where to find me.
Yeah, I know where to find you. And of course, we're going to have some new stuff happening in the future too. So you could always expect something new coming down the pike.
Yeah, we've got some big news coming.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Larry.
Thank you.